It fell against the windows of the old apartment like fingers asking to come inside. The city below looked gray and tired, swallowed by fog and silence. Cars moved slowly through puddles, people hurried beneath umbrellas, and somewhere in the middle of it all sat Daniel Harper, staring at a letter he had not opened for almost 2 weeks. The envelope rested on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee. He already knew what it said, or at least he thought he did. Another rejection, another closed door, another reminder that life had moved on without him. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed his tired eyes. At 36 years old, he felt older than his father had looked at 60. There was a heaviness inside him that sleep never fixed. He carried it into every room, every conversation, every morning. The apartment around him was quiet except for the ticking clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Time kept moving even when his life felt frozen. Once Daniel had dreamed of becoming an architect. Not because of money or status, but because he loved creating spaces where people could breathe, heal, and feel safe. In college, professors praised his designs. Friends told him he would build extraordinary things one day, but dreams change when life breaks in unexpectedly. His mother became sick. Medical bills piled up. His father lost his job. Daniel dropped everything to help his family survive. Years passed. The dream slowly disappeared beneath responsibility, grief, and exhaustion. Now his mother was gone. His father lived alone 2 states away. And Daniel worked nights managing inventory in a warehouse that smelled like dust and cardboard. Every evening he told himself he would try again someday. Someday never came. A sudden knock interrupted the silence. Daniel frowned. Nobody visited him. Another knock followed, slow, patient. He opened the door to find an elderly woman standing in the hallway holding a dripping umbrella. "Sorry to bother you," she said gently. "My power went out downstairs. Would you happen to have a flashlight?" Daniel blinked. Yes, I think so." He searched through a kitchen drawer and handed her a small flashlight. "Thank you," she smiled warmly. "You're Daniel, right?" He nodded carefully. "I'm Evelyn. I moved into apartment 2 billion last month." "Oh, right. I've seen you leave for work every night." Daniel gave a polite smile. "Well, thank you again." She turned to leave, then paused. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes people think they're stuck because a door is closed, but often the real problem is they stop noticing the open ones." Daniel looked confused. Evelyn simply smiled again and disappeared down the hallway. The words lingered long after the door shut. That night at work, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about them. He stacked boxes mechanically while forklifts buzzed around him. The warehouse lights flickered overhead like tired stars. Open doors. What open doors? His entire life felt like a hallway lined with locked entrances. At 2:17 a.m. during his lunch break, he finally opened the envelope from the table. His hands trembled slightly. Inside was not a rejection letter. It was an invitation. A small architecture nonprofit in Chicago had reviewed an old portfolio Daniel uploaded years ago. They were launching a community restoration project and wanted to interview him for a design position. Daniel stared at the words repeatedly. This had to be a mistake. He almost laughed. Why would they contact him now? Why him? The interview date had already passed. His chest sank immediately. Of course, too late again. But then he noticed a handwritten note at the bottom. "If you are still interested, please contact us. We extended our search." Daniel froze. Something moved inside him then. Not confidence, not certainty, just a quiet feeling. A whisper almost impossible to explain. "This door is still open." For the first time in years, hope entered the room carefully, like light slipping beneath a locked door. The next morning, Daniel called the number. A woman named Clara answered warmly. "We were wondering if you'd respond," she said. "You still want to interview me?" "Absolutely." Daniel swallowed hard. "You saw how old that portfolio was, right?" "We did." "And you still think I'm qualified?" There was a small pause. "Mr. Harper," Clara replied gently, "sometimes talent doesn't disappear. It just waits. Daniel sat speechless. The interview was scheduled for Friday, 3 days away. He spent every free hour preparing. He reopened sketchbooks he had buried in storage boxes. He reviewed old designs, studied new software tutorials online, and barely slept. But alongside the preparation came fear, massive fear. By Thursday night, doubt had returned completely. Who was he kidding? Other applicants were probably younger, smarter, more experienced. He imagined the interviewers secretly regretting inviting him. He almost canceled. At midnight, he walked downstairs and sat outside the apartment building beneath the covered entrance while rainwater dripped from the roof. And somehow Evelyn appeared again. "You look troubled," she said, sitting beside him. "I'm not ready," Daniel admitted. "For what?" "For the opportunity." Evelyn nodded slowly, as if she understood more than he said aloud. "Most people think courage feels fearless," she said, "but courage usually feels like standing at a door while your hands shake." Daniel looked toward the street. "What if I fail? What if you don't?" He laughed weakly. "That sounds nice, but life doesn't work that way." Evelyn studied him quietly. "When I was 27, she said, I wanted to become a pianist." Daniel looked surprised. "You?" "Oh yes. I loved music more than anything." "What happened?" "My husband died young. I raised 2 children alone instead." Daniel stayed silent. "Years later," she continued, "I finally auditioned for a small music school. I was terrified. Thought I was too old, too late, too forgotten." "Did you get in?" She smiled softly. "No," Daniel frowned. "But that audition led me to teaching children music at a church downtown. 40 years later, I still teach there." She looked directly at him. "Sometimes the door you imagine isn't the one meant for you, but that doesn't mean the hallway ends." Daniel felt those words settle deeply inside him. The next morning, he boarded a train to Chicago. The city looked enormous compared to the small world he had been living in. Tall buildings stretched into clouds. Streets buzzed with movement and possibility. The nonprofit office occupied part of an old renovated factory near the river. Inside, exposed brick walls were covered with sketches, maps, and photographs of damaged neighborhoods being rebuilt. A woman with dark curly hair greeted him immediately. "Daniel, I'm Clara." Her energy felt genuine. She introduced him to the team, showed him ongoing projects, and finally led him into a conference room where several architects reviewed portfolios. Daniel expected judgment. Instead, they asked thoughtful questions about his ideas. One older man named Marcus studied a drawing carefully. "You designed this community center 10 years ago." Daniel nodded nervously. Marcus smiled. "This is extraordinary," Daniel blinked. "No one's ever built it." "That's not the point," Marcus replied. "Vision matters." For the first time in years, Daniel felt seen, not pitied, not tolerated, seen. The interview lasted nearly 3 hours. When it ended, Clara walked him to the elevator. "You've lived a very different life than most applicants," she said. Daniel forced a small smile. "That's one way to say it." "No," Clara replied. "I mean it sincerely. Your work understands struggle. Most designers create buildings. You create refuge." The elevator doors opened. "We'll contact you soon," she said warmly. Back at home, waiting became unbearable. Days passed slowly. Daniel returned to the warehouse each night feeling suspended between 2 versions of himself. One version expected disappointment, the other dared to hope. Then came the phone call. He got the position. Daniel sat motionless after hearing the words. "You're offering me the job?" "Yes," Clara laughed. "We're very excited." Emotion rose suddenly into his throat. He couldn't speak for several seconds. After hanging up, he cried for the first time in years. Not because everything was fixed, not because life suddenly became perfect, but because somewhere deep inside him, something broken had started breathing again. The following month changed everything. Daniel moved to Chicago and began working with the nonprofit team, restoring abandoned buildings into shelters, schools, and community spaces. Every project carried purpose. Every blueprint mattered. And slowly, Daniel rediscovered the part of himself he thought had disappeared forever. But healing was not instant. Some nights fear still visited him. Some mornings insecurity returned. Trauma does not vanish simply because opportunity arrives. One evening after work, Daniel stayed late reviewing plans alone. Marcus entered carrying 2 coffees. "You work too hard," Marcus joked. Daniel smiled faintly. "I'm still trying to prove I belong here." Marcus leaned against the desk. "You know what I've learned after 30 years? What? The people most afraid they don't belong are often the ones who care the most." Daniel looked down quietly. Marcus continued, "You think this opportunity opened because of luck?" "Honestly, kind of." Marcus shook his head. "No, the door opened because you kept becoming the person capable of walking through it, even during the years you thought nothing was happening." Daniel sat very still. Those words reached somewhere deep. Because maybe the warehouse years had not been meaningless. Maybe caring for his mother mattered. Maybe surviving mattered. Maybe hidden growth was still growth. Weeks later, Daniel visited a restoration site on the south side of the city. The neighborhood had suffered years of neglect. Empty buildings stood like ghosts between cracked sidewalks. Children played basketball beside broken fences. An elderly man watched nearby from a folding chair. "You with the rebuilding group?" he asked. Daniel nodded. The man pointed toward the abandoned structure behind them. "That place used to be alive. Weddings, music, community dinners," he sighed. "Now people just see ruins." Daniel stared at the building carefully. Sunlight touched the broken windows, dust floated through the air, and suddenly he understood something powerful. Everyone thought the building was dead, but the foundation was still strong. It only needed restoration. The realization hit him unexpectedly hard. He wasn't just rebuilding buildings. He was rebuilding himself. Months passed. Winter arrived. Snow covered rooftops and softened the harshness of the city streets. One evening, Daniel received another letter. This one came from his father. Inside was a short handwritten note. "I saw your project online today. Your mother would have been proud of you." Daniel stared at the sentence for a long time. Then another line caught his attention. "I always worried life closed too many doors for you. Maybe I was wrong." Daniel folded the letter slowly, tears filling his eyes. That Christmas he visited Evelyn back home. She opened the apartment door smiling warmly. "You look different," she said immediately. "I feel different." They sat drinking tea while snow fell outside the window. Daniel told her everything. The job, the city, the projects, the fear, the healing. When he finished, Evelyn smiled knowingly. "So," she asked gently, "what changed?" Daniel thought carefully before answering. "I think," he paused, "I spent years waiting for certainty before moving forward. And now I think something inside us can recognize open doors before our minds fully believe it." Evelyn nodded softly. "Yes." Daniel looked around the small apartment. "You knew, didn't you?" "Knew what?" "That I needed hope," she smiled. "No, I simply recognized exhaustion. I've lived long enough to know exhausted people stop noticing possibilities." Silence settled peacefully between them. Then Evelyn said something Daniel would never forget. "Life rarely announces miracles loudly. Most open doors begin as quiet invitations." Years later, Daniel became lead designer for multiple national restoration projects. His work transformed forgotten spaces into places filled with life again. But the achievement he treasured most was something else entirely. At a youth center opening ceremony, a teenage boy approached him nervously holding a sketchbook. "I want to be an architect someday," the boy said quietly. Daniel smiled immediately. "Then start now." The boy hesitated. "What if I'm not good enough?" Daniel looked at him carefully, remembering his own fear. Then he answered gently, "You don't need to know everything today. Sometimes something inside you already knows the door is open before the rest of you catches up." The boy smiled. And in that moment, Daniel understood the full truth. The open door had never only been about career or success. It was about permission. Permission to believe life was not over. Permission to begin again. Permission to stop defining himself by delay, grief, failure, or fear. Because many people spend years standing in front of locked doors. never realizing the handle beside them turns easily. Not every opportunity arrives wrapped in confidence. Sometimes it arrives disguised as a small feeling you almost ignore. A quiet pull, a stubborn hope, a whisper deep inside saying, try again, call the number, take the train, answer the invitation, walk forward. You may not understand why the path opened now instead of earlier. You may not feel prepared. You may still carry scars from everything life has taken from you, but scars do not mean the story ended. Sometimes they are proof you survived long enough to reach the next chapter. And maybe, even now, somewhere inside your own tired heart, something already knows. This door is open.